This podcast is proudly sponsored by Gyro Drilling. They provide world-class drilling solutions for all types of projects. They specialise in auger, aircore and RC drilling. Head to the team at Gyro Drilling for all your mining needs and see how they can help you with your upcoming project. Hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. As this podcast grows, every subscriber helps. From those of you who watch this on YouTube or to those that listen on Spotify and Apple, every follower helps. If you do this one favour and hit follow on whatever platform you find us on, I promise I will continue to look and find fascinating people across the world and bring their perspectives to you. Thank you and enjoy this episode. Hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. Joining me in the studio today is Peter Kerr. I was trying to think of the best way to describe himself, but he's an energy sort of consultant at ATA Consultancy. He's going to talk us a lot about the whole energy realm, and I bumped into him at a small event. So thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Ben, great, and loved your energy. No pun, or actually
A bit of pun.
Total pun intended, but loved the energy. And yeah, thanks for having me on. It's a great sector and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, so before we dive through the whole energy outlook for Western Australia and Australia, I think it's good to, talk about who you are as a person, because many may be like, oh, who are you? Never heard of you before.
Why should I be listening to him?
Exactly.
Yeah, man.
So talk about your origins and history within the business and eventually energy sector.
Yeah, well, look, I'm probably got some would say, and maybe it's not appropriate, but, attention deficit disorder when it comes to career, because I just love, I have jumped around a lot. I started out as an economist and at the Reserve Bank of Australia, and did lots of financial market stuff, foreign exchange trading and the like. And then, you go through changes in life, you want maybe something more. And so one of those things that I jumped to was journalism and political and business journalism, including working at the AFR as the bureau chief in WA. And when I was there, I just started writing, more and more about energy. And it was back in the day, you forget, but in 2009, WA's first big wave of rooftop solar got put on. So it's not that long ago, right? And I just have seen the industry grow, and I just thought, I want to be part of this. So, a few jobs later, I ended up at Western Power, which is the big network, the distributor of energy, electricity, the poles and wires. And then I've had, in the last couple of years, a chance to go out and advise clients on my own. So mining clients, utility clients, developers of renewable energy projects, all the way through to just traditional pole and wire clients that are maintaining assets. So I pretty much consult across the full spread of the industry. And just hope, I guess my aim is to try and help accelerate the energy transition from fossil fuels to renewables.
So then, again, back then, going into this realm, was it curiosity and excitement? And what were the sort of factors that were like, I want to get into this? What was really driving you to pursue the energy sector?
Yeah, so I didn't think much about energy back in the day. The light comes on, you flick the switch, it's all okay.
Everything works.
Everything works. It's good, and I think largely a lot of people that's their daily experience. But when I started writing the first few articles, you'd meet some people, and they'd sort of take you a little bit deeper into the sector, and it's amazing how complex and how technologically advanced it is. And that just for some reason hooked me in, and it kind of got into my blood. And so you start following and talking to more people, you work in the industry, you learn a bit more about actually how it's all produced, you see some of the new innovation coming through, and it just captured my imagination. And on top of that, you've got the chance to potentially make a big difference in what is a once in a 2-century change that we're going through. We are transforming our energy system from a fossil fuel-based energy system to a renewable energy system. So that's pretty cool to be part of.
And I mean, being within that, you would have started, you said around the 2009 period of time?
It's around that. So
there must have been huge fluctuations with the whole energy sector since then.
Oh, well, it's interesting that WA's last major power plant that was built was in 2009. It was a coal-fired power station called Blue Waters in Southwest. Now, at the time, everyone thought this thing's going for 40, 50, 60 years. is on the verge of being closed down because of the impact that renewable energy is having on it, and of course the associated environmental concerns that people have with that power. So literally in a decade, things have been upended in terms of what we used to think the system would be. It was a very linear, kind of consistent, you could plan, very easily, to today where it's dynamic, requires a lot of computing power to help balance the system. Yeah, so in that 10 to 15 years, there's been a massive transformation. And so, yeah, we've gone from probably 80% to 95% fossil fueled power in WA in that time. And some days we're at 85% renewables. So it's almost flipped on its head some days, yeah.
So then when we're talking about the spread of energy, there's quite a few resources that we use to contribute to this. I mean, can you just, explain a bit of what the energy mix is really in West Australia, maybe more so to Australia?
Yeah, so they're slightly different. The first thing to say about WA is it's isolated. So what do I mean by that? It's not connected by a wire to any other electrical system. Generally, electrical systems are interconnected to other, neighbouring networks, so that it's more efficient that way, and there's always backup. So WA is slightly different in that respect. So we have coal for about a third of our power on average. We have gas for another 30 or 40% of our power, and the rest effectively is renewables. So
the renewables sort of spread as a mix as well?
They're spread in the mix. So large part is solar and largely on rooftops around Perth. So that's probably the biggest. If you aggregated all the solar on all the rooftops in Perth into one unit, that would be the biggest source of energy from one source, in the system. And then you've got some wind increasingly coming onto the system, and you've got a bit of biogas, which is just, an old tip. There'll be some rubbish, it's decomposing, it's releasing gas. You turn that gas into electricity.
Interesting. Yeah. So then, talking about solar, the scale of that, if we start with that one, when did the direction really get set within Australia to almost adopt it and start going, it's now a prerequisite on most houses to have them? And even the duration, I look at, if it started in 2009, what's the lifetime span of a lot of these solars before you need to start recouping them and recycling, I guess, if that's the term? Or
no, it's a good So, there is no mandate to have solar in general. But what happened in around that time in 2009 is lots of governments decided to get serious about subsidising solar panels on rooftops to see if they could accelerate the transition. And so you were getting very generous subsidies back in 2009. They were called feed-in tariffs. And so that kind of almost baked in, that generation of renewables. What's happened since is that solar has become so cheap that it's almost, you'd be silly not to have it on your rooftop, because you can still make money from it if you're using it to power a pool pump or a fridge or your new EV or air conditioners like that.
Yeah.
So it's now actually an economic choice, whereas before it was a subsidised choice. So that's probably the broad sweep of it. In terms of the longevity of the system, absolutely. Inverters might last 5, 10, 15 years, and the inverter is the thing that takes the energy, the direct current from the solar panel, turns it into AC that can be used by the grid and by your appliances. And so those inverters might last, 10, 15 years, and then you have to replace them. The panels tend to last longer, but eventually they, either there's better tech that comes along or they do degrade. And so you do need to replace it. But the thing is, when you get to a significant scale, everyone's replacing them at slightly different rates. And so the system keeps growing, if you like. And so there's not a big cliff that the system suddenly falls off because they all stop working.
Yeah, they weren't all just dropped on the roof at the same time.
No, and they won't start, they won't stop working at a certain date. So it's almost like an organic system that grows. And so, and just last quarter in WA, so we had the record electricity demand that we've ever seen, 5,000 megawatts or 5 gigawatts, which is big, for us, but not necessarily by global terms. But so that was the maximum demand we have ever had. Lots of people turning on air conditioners, all that sort of stuff. Interestingly, rooftop solar increased its share of the overall mix by about 0.5 percentage point in the last quarter. So it's still growing.
Continuing to grow.
It's still growing, yeah.
Because, I mean, when I thought you drive to certain places in Perth, at least, or even Western Australia, you just see almost cities worth of solar on top of roofs. And then there's even just the solar farms that were a big push.
Yeah.
And, I mean, are they still sort of growing in their regards to where they're going? I mean, what's happening with that? Or have they just decided that it's best to have them on residential houses and office buildings?
So, initially it made sense for residential. Interestingly, commercial is starting to grow exponentially, but it took longer. I think there was probably a number of reasons there. Sometimes you don't own the property. It's a tenant or a strat. Some companies own the property, and so they haven't put solar on. So commercial's got lots of scope to have solar on. In WA, there haven't been many large-scale solar farms. There's a couple in planning now. The thing that's changed is, so I'll step back. Why are there not a lot of big solar farms? Because you've got all that solar on the roof, they're competing at the same time, i.e. the sun's shining in the midday, and that's when you're trying to sell your electricity from a solar farm, and you're competing against all this rooftop solar. So it's hard to make money. What's come along in the last 5 years is very cheap battery storage. So a solar farm can now take that power, store it in a battery, and then push it out onto the grid at night, so you can phase shift that power. And so that's been the big game changer for solar, and also manufacturing costs have just fallen through the floor. So there's been a 40% reduction in the cost of solar panels even in the last 2 or 3 years. So the economics are getting even better and better. So larger scale solar and batteries are a thing. Wind is increasingly a thing as well. There are some constraints about how quickly you can connect them into the system, how quickly you can build them.
Yeah.
Because there's a bit of a supply chain issue, but they are starting to grow more and more. And then there's a very nascent industry in offshore wind. So these are poles that are stuck out near Rottnest Island or wherever. Victoria is probably the most advanced state in that regard. They've got a kind of they'll be the first one to get an offshore wind farm of all Australia, and they're doing it to replace all their brown coal, which is where they get most of their power from on the east coast, is coal. Yeah.
Gotcha. So one of the big things, at least thinking now from the solar point of view, is the batteries, because I'd always heard again.
Yeah.
It was coming on board and you could get your electricity straight away, but it was that storage implication that was always almost a hurdle for a lot of people. So within the battery realm, I mean, what's been evolving to now facilitate that storage abilities for solar, for homes?
Yeah,
for all of it?
And so it depends on the scale you're talking about. So home batteries are cheaper than they used to be, but it's still difficult to make the economic case for them, although some people are doing that. The thing to be said about home batteries is that you'll soon have a home battery with wheels on it. So your car, don't think of it as a car, think of it as a battery with wheels. And so increasingly the technology is that you can use your battery to feed your home at certain times of the day, and vice versa. You can charge from the rooftop solar. So you don't really need to have a battery sitting on your wall.
Planted, yeah.
You may as well, because these are big batteries in cars, much bigger than you can ever buy in a domestic setting. So you think about the battery actually as the car. And there have been a couple of trials where people have given away cars to people if they can, in a strata situation of apartments. And so as long as you give them control of the battery so it can help balance the electrical load in the strata, you get the car and you can use the car. But then at night you come home, plug it in, and the system uses the battery to help balance the system. So it's lots emerging, lots of incredible tech, not quite there yet. It's still a bit expensive for homes, but there are definitely people adopting it. And There are even things like community batteries, so a bigger battery parked in a park that can be shared by 100 homes, for example. And so you just buy a little slice. It's like having a bit of a Google Drive in your park. So that's the residential end. What's changed on the larger scale? I think the automotive industry actually is where things have really, kicked off. They've had to try and concentrate on cost, on the weight of the battery and the energy density of the battery. And there's been some amazing technology, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, going into these batteries. And so the per kilowatt amount that you have to pay for a battery these days is hardly anything. So you can put some of these batteries together at a utility scale, and and ergo, you have a cheap storage spot for large scale energy. So that's the thing that's really changed. So it's some of the chemical compositions of the battery have changed as well.
How so? If I go into that, because I know there's particularly focus on lithium, of course. But from the chemical position, what's happening with that side of the batteries?
Yeah, so look, there'll be horses, for courses. There's lots of different uses, and lithium is going to be a very important player for many, 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 many years. But even in the last few years, you've seen a change in the makeup of how much lithium you need. And so it used to be pretty standard lithium ion, ION chemistry, and that's good because it's light, it's dense, and it can discharge energy really quickly. So it's got a pretty good use case there. It does have some challenges, with safety. So thermal runaway occasionally can be a problem. Not a huge problem. You can deal with it, but it's a thing. Go back a couple of years and you get to a thing called lithium ion, IRON, phosphate batteries. And so they're taking out some of the more expensive metals, the cobalt, for example, that you might have heard about, and they've got a new composition. Now it's almost as good energy density, it's cheaper than the lithium ion, and it's safer. So that's an advance, there. And now they're testing things like sodium ion batteries, so salt, lots of it. Aluminium batteries, again, lots of aluminium around the world. And then there's another completely different class of batteries that are called flow batteries. And so these are vanadium flow, redox. They're redox batteries. There is actually an iron flow battery which replicates the process of iron rusting and then not rusting. And so and as it rusts and derusts, it releases electrical energy. And so there are companies that have actually produced a successful iron flow battery, if you like. And they are good because although they're bigger, they have you can just add lots of energy storage by just adding extra tanks of electrolyte or the flow material. And so you get a long duration battery. So lithium tends to be good for 1, 2, 4 hours. These tend to be good for up to 10 to 12 hours. And so you'll just need a mix of things. Any energy system never relies on one fuel source, and it never relies on one storage source. You might even have a couple of cases for old mines in WA using pumped hydro. That's another bit of storage, right? That's really long storage, seasonal storage. And so you've got an old mine pit. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to rehab it? I don't know, that's going to cost a lot. Maybe you'll fill it with water and turn it into a pumped hydro scheme. So you pump the water up with solar power, store it, and then you reverse the flow at night and it produces electricity through a turbine.
Oh, I hadn't heard of that strategy.
Yeah, so there's a company called Genex, and they are in Queensland, and they're basically producing a pumped hydro scheme out of an old mine pit. So just starting to kind of get economically viable, but there's a few of them around.
So then for the landscape of energy, we've got all of those, and we talk about the distribution of energy. Are there any considerations when it comes to how we disseminate that energy across? Like, is there the next stage of improving the transmission? I'm not 100% an expert in that realm, but how does that also fold into the conversation? We can get energy, we'd store it, but then how do we distribute it, and how can we send it back if it's being in the homes and that sort of system?
Yeah, and you've hit upon probably what is the most challenging part of the transition. You're right. It's the transport of those electrons is a challenge. So sometimes you can think of the system in two layers. So you have high level voltage transmission towers, the big, structures, and that tends to power the big mines, the big smelters, all that sort of, stuff, the big city, electricity requirements. And then you have a distribution level, sort of the suburban poles and wires, which radiate. So the transmission gets the power to a substation, and then that power is stepped down in voltage and it radiates out to homes, and you get it at 240 volts. I think the challenge at the large end of town, the big transmission end of town, is it's expensive and it takes up to 10 years to build a transmission line. And so you need transmission lines for all these new wind farms and new solar farms. So that's a block. And then at the lower end of town, you've got lots and lots of solar, and you've got a problem with that because it creates instability in the system. So how do you soak it up? How do you match the two systems together? So there needs to be a lot more work on the connections and the building of transmission lines, and there needs to be a lot more work on the smaller end to use the electricity locally. And so not build out lots and lots of distribution at the local level. So it might be, okay, I can put a community battery there and everyone can share electricity where it's produced, rather than shipping it to a substation, one day and then getting it all the way back. Or it might be I can trade electricity with my neighbour, right? So I might have solar panels, my neighbour might not. Can I trade between houses?
And that's going down the decentralised energy route.
Correct.
As well.
It's a little bit, there's a company, PowerLedge, that started up in WA that, is trying to pioneer that. And basically they're using blockchain technology to,
I think I've heard about this one as well.
Yeah. And so the idea is basically democratise and localise energy usage. So production and usage. Your car could be a battery, and that could, park at your workplace, and maybe your workplace has solar, and you could fill up your car. Maybe that's a fringe benefit or something like that. Then you come home, maybe you can give some power to someone. So there's a real chance at both ends. At some point, you have to marry the two, because that's just how the systems are, and so you do need some interesting tech to coordinate or orchestrate the whole thing. And that's still emerging, so that's not fully there yet.
Yeah.
But people are running very hard at it. Yeah.
I can imagine, because that's the opportunity within the opportunity itself is
correct.
that there's vast amounts of energy sources being brought online and how to create it, but then it's actually about distributing it and, as we said, the storing, and that was the whole emergence of the batteries for solar and wind, and then the topic we haven't even broached about, at least from an Australian point of view, is nuclear. And I don't know where to really go through that.
I think it's a really good. So look, I'll just finish off on the transmission side. So one of the benefits of doing more at a distributed level, at a local level, is that you avoid having to build too much transmission. And so that should reduce the costs overall of the energy system, so people's power bills shouldn't be as much. So that's a good thing. Let's leave that there. So nuclear, so what about nuclear? While I'm really passionate and I do most of my work in renewable energy, I'm not I believe that nuclear does have a place. I'm not sure that it has a place in Australia necessarily, except in one case, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it frustrates me a little bit that the conversation is either or. You have existing nuclear plants that are in operation and can be extended. You have some countries that would like to build nuclear. It is despite some major critical incidents, in the main, it's a safe industry, and it's better than burning coal. That's how I view it. It does come with some challenges, though, especially when you've got a small electricity system like Western Australia. they're just generally too big. They can't turn off, and so you almost electricity has to almost be. There's a bit of storage now, obviously, but generally electricity is consumed and produced at the same time. You can't really ramp nuclear plants too much, and in WA, because of all the solar, in the middle of the day, we hardly, there'll be in a couple of years, Perth may not need any net new energy in the middle of the day. It might get all its energy from rooftop. So what do you do with the nuclear plant that's running there? You're like, I don't know. Can you just turn off?
Yeah.
No, we can't. That's going to melt down the reactor. So there are some technical challenges. Now everyone will throw up. But what about a small modular nuclear reactor? Well, the only privately funded small modular nuclear reactor company in America has basically just said, no, we can't make it work. It's too expensive. Now, there are some examples where China and the Middle East are pouring extraordinary, eye-watering amounts into nuclear. And, okay, good luck to them, but I don't think in Australia,
Because the population density doesn't quite equate to it at the moment.
Correct, at the moment. The only time that it might make sense is, and again, I still think that we've got the technology with renewables and storage, but you could potentially mount a case for where lots and lots and lots of energy is needed, and that's the Pilbara, the mines. So that's my overall view of it. I guess there's a couple of big stumbling blocks though, and this is the problem with the nuclear debate, is that it distracts us from technology that we largely know. We can get to 85% renewables on a system pretty quickly. So let's just go and do it without worrying about nuclear for now. If we have to think about it in 20 years, well, so be it. There are two problems. One is it's illegal. And so can you imagine how long it takes to get laws through Parliament, right? So I just don't want to have that kind of distracting conversation, right? Let's just get on with what we know and then maybe over time, but let's not make it our pure focus. The second one is if you're having problems, and we do have problems with people wanting to block wind farm developments on, onshore and offshore, can you imagine what they're going to do with a nuclear plant? I mean, who would want a nuclear plant, can you imagine in Collie where the coal plants, are? Now, there has been a suggestion that you put a nuclear plant where the coal-fired power stations are. Is that going to fly? And then it takes 10, 20 years to build at a horrible cost. So it's like, look, I'm not saying no, but maybe where it's already going and when there are large population centres with huge electricity needs that are currently being powered by coal, then sure. But I think we're very blessed and fortunate in WA to have this great wind and solar resource with some storage and with a little bit of gas backup. I think we're good.
Yeah, okay, because that's the debate rages on about nuclear, and I've had plenty of conversations about it, and I think the global fleet for nuclear is really emerging in countries that have got vast populations and also maybe not necessarily have access to the sun and solar as dominant within Australia. But then, thinking out loud, the winter time comes along in Australia, it's still a bit sunny, but the yields aren't as high. Yep. How do the combinations all flow to make sure that, really in the winter people are using, heating more as opposed to aircon and different energy uses and demands? But how do all those sorts of combinations help to relieve any outages? Because we hear so many people talk about the energy crisis, and I just sort of hear it as a blanket statement. But where does all that really come from? Yeah,
and it is, especially for WA, which is not connected to any other energy source, it's a huge challenge. So there's almost reliably every year in WA a 2-week period where there's a lot of cloud cover and the wind isn't particularly strong. And the Germans have this beautiful term for it, Dunkelflaut, which is basically like a renewables drought. So I think everyone needs to be grown up and realistic about that. So, there are challenges in what are you going to do in those periods of 1 or 2 weeks, especially if you don't have huge amounts of pumped hydro, which can kind of tide you through that period. So you might need to accept that you're going to have some reserve power around, and that's gas. And that gas might eventually become hydrogen. And it might be a big plant that just sits there for 2 weeks a year, and it's horrendously expensive, but it's still probably 20% the cost of a nuclear plant, which couldn't operate anyway because nuclear plants don't operate for 2 weeks a year. So, yeah, you're going to need some backup. Storage won't cut it for you. Just like a portfolio that you invest in, right? Diversity is absolutely queen. So it's just like as many different sources as you can. As many different geographical locations, which is why offshore might work in WA as well, because it's got a different wind profile to onshore. Think about potentially long-term, what do you do with gas storage? Could that be hydrogen storage? And while the electricity produced by that hydrogen might be expensive, what's the alternative? Turn your lights off? Then you've got to also think about your system and, like, is it efficient? And, should we be doing more for efficiency at homes? And, so that's another kind of conversation. But, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And, I mean, again, we're going towards this, removing coal and fossil fuels. And, I mean, off the top of my head, I know the Europeans got it for 2050, and I'm not sure what Australia has got them set with the same sort of... Are we, I guess, built and getting towards that point? Because I think the fear in the back of my mind is that we go down this path and then we realise we're not actually ready, and then we just sort of kick out the deadline a bit longer, and then it's that you hear people talk about it. We're never really going to be completely obsolete from fossil fuels because it is still such a proven and trusted energy source where arguably at the moment we're venturing into a world of it's all experimental until it's on that global scale. So what's the... His thought process being within that sector and seeing it all unfold. What are your thoughts on that?
So look, 2050 is a challenging target to get to 100% renewable. No doubt about it. Getting to 100% renewable is a challenging target. So I think the more pragmatic people in this industry will say, we know how to get to 90% renewable energy on average for the year with existing proven technology. So it's not even really, a trial technology anymore. Wind, solar, and battery storage can get you most of the way. Then you have a problem with the last 10% of the system, if you like. And and so a lot of pragmatic people will say, well, let's use gas, right? We've got lots of it. It's not ideal, but let's not distract ourselves from getting to 90% pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So that's probably the sort of sanguine view. In terms of will we run too far and then realise we've made a mistake and we've mothballed plants that we should still be using? I don't think that's going to be the case. I think there's enough flex at the moment in the system that you can pull up if you need to. And so the good example in WA is that we're going to retire our coal plants notionally by 2029. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they'll extend another 5-10 years. And I think people have got to be comfortable with that because of the challenges of connecting extra renewables. Now, some people don't want to hear that, and some people go, and you're like, well, we should have an honest conversation about it, right?
Because you'd rather have them going and using a bit of it other than no lights on.
Correct, exactly. And so, would I like to go faster? Of course I would, but I'm also pragmatic about it. But I do believe we've largely got the technology set and the diversity of energy sources that we need. Now, in some countries, that will mean nuclear. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it will in Australia. I think we're just very lucky. Density, resources, solar, wind. So I think the potential there is amazing. And then, the only thing that I would say is worth thinking about are the untested technology. That's where things like, if you need a backup gas source and you want to make that hydrogen eventually, I think what I'm still yet to see is a technology that can easily store and hold a lot of energy. Now, there's some amazing stuff coming out of Curtin University in WA. They're making metal hydrides, which are, almost
What are
like
those?
a powdered form of hydrogen. And so you can then reconstitute them with water and they throw off hydrogen. Now that's my very, that's my PK.
Top level.
Top level PK, whoa, egghead,
yeah.
sort of, thing. But no, if someone could crack that storage of hydrogen at no pressure at about 60 degrees, it's, we've solved a big bit of the puzzle. Now, it'll still be expensive energy, but you'll be able to store a lot of it, and then you'll be able to worry about those as a need. So I think there are definitely use cases for it. And then we haven't even touched on biofuels, but I think there's a huge opportunity for biofuels. And, even the cellular store, hay, if you don't use all your hay, you might be able to transform it into a biodiesel. So
Yeah, gotcha. The biofuels, we might quickly touch there because you mentioned that at the beginning, and my sort of reaction was I hadn't
biogas and
that.
biodiesel. So there's two, yeah. So look, biogas is a well-known thing. My favourite innovative story is actually one of Australia's biggest fertiliser companies is based in Perth, and they have a facility that basically turns, shit, pardon the French,
literal,
into fertiliser. But some of the gases that are released, they capture and they generate electricity with. And so that's biogas effectively. But what they also do is, because generally electricity production produces heat, they capture that heat in a greenhouse out the back and they grow blueberries. And they harvest the blueberries because they're a very high yielding crop that relies on the heat, And so amazing symmetry of what you can do when you really think about it. In terms of biofuel, slightly different. But we've got lots of land, and potentially you can grow certain crops that don't disrupt the food chain, if you like. Don't take away food that we need, but is largely sort of scrappy crop, if you like. And there are processes that you can convert it into a usable diesel, a biodiesel.
Yeah, I hadn't explored that. I mean, I think that'd be a long conversation. But one that we haven't broached on is the growing infrastructure side of it, more so from electric vehicles and bringing those online, and I guess the mass adoption potentially of those. And you look to Europe and some of their goals towards having pretty much 100% sales of EVs by a certain period of time, which is quite incredible to think about. But then does it translate efficiently towards, Australia, UK, USA, sorry. I mean, rolling through that onboarding process, I mean, that's a massive undertaking in itself. Where does a country like Australia even start?
How do you start? Yeah. So I think, look, it's a we could spend all day on just that question. It is a very important question because it's also bound up in people's habits and anxieties.
We talked about
that before, right?
Yeah.
So I've now got a mobile phone, and I'm sometimes I'm freaked out if I've got 54%.
Yeah, it's not 100%. I've got to put it on charge,
but it's like, well, actually, that'll last me a day, right? And so I've just got to kind of calm down. And it's similar, I think, a little bit with setting expectations around how do you charge your car. And you might not need a lot of energy. Most trips are on average, 30 or 40K a day. It's only on occasions that you'll go for a long drive. So you don't really need a lot of charge at all. I know I bumped into someone at a function the other night. They charge their car once a week. Yeah, once a week.
Because everyone's got that almost bias that, I have to go home, I have to charge, or
I know.
I'll drive somewhere, I have to put it on charge.
But they do not charge, So they charge it from their rooftop on one day, and then that lasts them 7 days. And so it can be done. And these are not, particularly, hippie sort of types. They are, practical people who have got the 9-to-5 job, they're kind of like. So it can be done, but you do have need a shift in mindset. That said, of course you do need some more infrastructure and build out. And one of the other things we were talking about just before we came on was how do you, if you're in a city and you've got lots of cars that don't have garages, how do they charge? So, but there's even some really interesting things, literally popping up, i.e. bollard-style chargers that are in the ground. They pop up and you can plug your car into. Or even the pay machines, your ticket machines will have, charging stations, or traffic on streetlights.
Yeah.
So we've just got to get a little bit more creative with our infrastructure. There will be a challenge for the system to balance it all out. You don't want people coming home at,
and I think that's where a lot of it came from. Everyone will be, we get home at 6 o'clock, and everyone just suddenly goes, yeah. And it's like, how do you balance that?
Yeah.
And then how do you, educate people to go, all right, maybe not everyone chucks it on at 6 p.m. at night.
And
leaves it on overnight sort of thing.
And look, the good thing is that these cars come with incredible software, right? So like a Tesla can tell you when is the best time to charge for your wallet.
Yeah.
Right. So just let it do it. Right. Like it's all good. I got you. I'm going to be charging at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
Go inside.
Yeah. You don't need to worry about it.
You don't need to worry about it. I've got this. And so I think eventually people will get comfortable with that idea.
Yeah, because we were talking again about the infrastructure rollout, the idea that the petrol station will be completely, well, not completely, but somewhat obsolete in the regards that it will have to shift. And we were talking about, or you were talking about some of the rollouts, at least in Europe and the UK. I mean, can you shed light on a bit about what's happening there? Because we're sadly a little bit behind the ballpark.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Although, our own, homegrown Ampol, they're starting to convert, some of their stations to have some electric chargers. Yes, Shell was recently in one of, there's others, but Shell recently announced that they're converting a bunch of their stations to EV only. In addition to that, you've got companies like, Tesla that, put these supercharged stations near, a bunch of different cool places to go, like a shopping mall or something like that. And so, again, there's a little bit of behaviour there. So I've been in Norway, had a mate, has a Tesla. We turned up to there was a burger joint, there was a bar, there was a destination. And we hung out there for 20 minutes and the car was charged. It was okay. Like, I survived. But yeah, so that'll happen over time, right? Because and interestingly, for service station owners, it's probably a greater opportunity to earn some revenue from people sitting in your shop, right?
Massively.
Like so that's one. But my favourite example of is actually in Korea, where because all the service stations, they have the big tanks underneath. So there is a trial in Korea going on for vanadium flow battery. And they're going to store the electrolyte in the old fuel tank. And so basically they'll charge, up the flow battery, if you like, from cheap electricity at a certain point of the day. And then when people come, in the day to, plug their car in, it'll be sourced, the charge will be sourced from these reservoirs of electrolyte, battery electrolyte underground. So look, it's one idea. Who knows whether it gets up? It might be expensive, but at least someone's having a good crack, right?
Yeah.
And it's like actually repurposing of that infrastructure is also important, right? So you don't have to build new infrastructure necessarily. Just pull out the old pumps and put in some new electric chargers. Now there's some upgrades needed, with transformers potentially, but nothing that we can't contemplate in our existing toolkit.
Yeah, and I just see the way, I've had great conversations with my dad at length, being like he doesn't want to wait around for 30-odd minutes for it. Yeah. But then these days, with everyone's access to technology, some people would just happily sit on their phone for 20, 30 minutes.
You could doom scroll for like 30 minutes.
Exactly, and just send some emails. And it's, that ability of the whole work transformation, and it's almost like it doesn't seem that far-fetched to think that people might end up spending 20 to 30 minutes at these destination sort of experiences as opposed to just going out, filling up, dipping off.
And it might even be less than that. So, if you buy a high-end Mark, with a 800, volt charger, it might be 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And so, sure, over time, like everything, all those, fancy innovations trickle down to, my sort of car. But look, human ingenuity and innovation is incredible, and you see it every day. The management systems of these, the software behind this can help you. He can even tell you, look, I know you're really worried about 100%, but I can get you to there.
I can get you to
with
2% driving at the efficiency.
Right?
Yeah.
We got this. Only spend 5 minutes there. It's like, when you used to be I used to be a tight ass student, right? And I'd just go to the fuel station and I'd fill up for $5.
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
That's all I had.
Get me through to the next day.
Could I have $4.79 worth of fuel, please?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do that with electricity as well, right? Like, not because you can't afford it, but because you can't afford the time. Same concept, right? I'm just going to plug in to get me home.
Yeah.
Great. So there's a lot of behavioural economics in this. But then, to your point about like people will spend half an hour on TikTok. People also spend $5 worth of fuel driving to get like 2 cent cheaper fuel at the moment, right? Like they'll drive for miles because they think they're getting a deal. It's like sometimes humans are just not rational and interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the fascinating journey that it's embarking on for a global point of view and WA and just where the energy market really leads to. A lot of the argument is all about the EVs and who knows where the technology is going within air transportation, boats. When you go to Europe, you just see hundreds of trucks delivering goods and services. Is that the other evolution within that? And there's just so many, areas that are exploding. So in conclusion, in some regard, I mean, where do you see the outlook for energy going over the next 10-ish years? I mean, I don't know really what the standard is for evaluating.
Yeah, look, I think...
And you probably would have never considered this starting even back then. It's every 10 years is going to be different for you. Yeah.
Look, I think it can be best paraphrased as electrify everything. There's an amazing guy, Saul Griffith. If you haven't heard of him, go and read a bit of his stuff. He makes a really good point. Excuse me.
Sorry.
He makes a really good point that households will make 5 or 6 major purchases in their lifetime. So it'll be a car, a fridge, a hot water system, He's done some research that if everyone just decided as that next appliance broke to replace it with an electric equivalent, so your gas stove becomes an electric induction heater, that is consistent with us probably hitting globally 1.8 degrees warming because it reduces the emissions because a lot of that electricity is coming from renewable energy and you're not burning fossil fuels in your car anymore. So that is consistent with minimising the impacts of climate change. It's a very simple thing, right? Like I've got 6 choices over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Just make them electric. And I think, whether that's road transport, shipping, even close-range aviation, a lot of that will just be electric as well, all powered by renewable energy. So that's sort of where I think it's all going.
Interesting. No, fascinating. And I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, and I think the energy discussion is probably not justified within a quick hour-long conversation. But for those that are interested in, I guess, your realm and what you talk about, where you focus, I mean, how can people learn more and probably engage with yourself and even approach you and ask questions first and foremost?
Great. Always willing to have a yarn. So I do a lot of I post a lot about the WA energy market on LinkedIn, and so you can search for me, Peter Kerr, ATA Consulting on LinkedIn. What's really good about that is that you get a chance to have a debate, and it's generally reasoned, right? It's not like
a yelling, screaming
match. So, you learn some great nuance and some great perspective. So even just following a couple of people, Paul Martin's another really interesting guy, Michael Bernard, find a couple of people that kind of resonate and then go down the rabbit warren, whatever interests you. But that's how I kind of started, and I think listen to some of these podcasts.
So
that's another great way.
Bringing unheard voices to the forefront.
Correct, exactly, yeah. So,
I appreciate it, Peter. It's, again, the whole evolution of where we're going, at least in WA, it's a bit of a small town compared to probably some of the other jurisdictions.
Little old us, but it's, we're still doing, we're punching above our weight here, yeah.
But it's been a great conversation, and appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks, man. That was great. Really enjoyed it, and all the best for the 100
odd episodes.
Yeah, congratulations.
To the next 100.
Yeah, okay. Well done. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. Please remember that the topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial advice. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, share, and follow. You can follow The Market Bull on all our socials and keep up to date with global market insights.